Why did they lie to us? And why is it taking so long for every government agency to admit what we all know? Because belief in a lab leak as the origin is not a conspiracy theory, is it, Mr. Ratcliffe?
No. Well, I think, when you look at the intelligence community report that the Biden administration put out in October of 21, they acknowledge that China's refusal to cooperate, but the report in any way ignores what I think is the inescapable fact and reality that if the CCP had anything exculpatory to showing that no one was to blame for this,
right,
that this occurred naturally, that they would share that. And why not share data, samples, research, everything that they had access to that would tend to show that this was naturally occurring, that lab leak theory really was a conspiracy theory. But they didn't do that because they couldn't do that. And to me, that's why making an assessment with some level of confidence is something that should have been done a long time ago by the intelligence community. Mike Pompeo and I labored over how much of this can we put out, hoping that it would drive.
Here's what gets me. So the director of national intelligence knew this thing came from a lab. The Secretary of State knew this thing came from a lab. Common sense tells you this thing came from a lab. And frankly, even the guys who called us names knew it came from a lab because we have their emails. We have their emails from the start. Mr. Gary says, I don't know how this happens in nature. It'd be easy to do in a lab. Mr. Anderson says, this is not consistent with evolutionary. Everyone knew at the get-go. You knew at the get-go. And yet, they tell us just the opposite. Why?
You had the top diplomat, the top of the intelligence community, the top public health official, all telling you with some confidence level the most likely origin of this was a lab leak. And I think that unfortunately for political reasons and political narratives, it was difficult.
So did you talk with Dr. Fauci during this time frame when you get in May and over the next several months? Did you talk to Dr. Fauci anytime?
No.
Never spoke with Dr. Fauci?
No.
Do you find that strange when he's out saying something directly contrary to the Secretary of State, to the Director of National Intelligence, and to the top virologist, Dr. Redfield, that Dr. Fauci wouldn't talk with you?
Yeah, to be clear, there were folks within the coronavirus task force that were communicating, medical and scientific information to the intelligence community, not me directly. But none of that information was frankly consistent with what we've talked about, what the intelligence showed. Again, some of those individuals, to include Dr. Fauci, were promoting the idea that this was natural origins, and notwithstanding the language that was read, they were referring to it publicly as a conspiracy theory in certain conversations.
Dr. Collins called us conspiracy theorists if you believed in the lab as the origin. Tell me why do you think Fauci and Collins took that? I got my theory and I think I'm right, but I'd like to hear from the Director of National Intelligence what he thinks Fauci and Collins' motivation for sharing false information with the American people.
Well, I think the best evidence of that is their own conversations, which say that they didn't want unwarranted or unwanted, or I think the term was unwanted attention to the relationships that were taking place between Western virologists and those working within the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and funding sources for some of that research.
Our money to a lab in China that wasn't up to code, that was doing gain-of-function research, and that's where this thing came from. That's what they didn't want us to know. Do you agree with that, Mr. Ratcliffe?
I do agree with that.
That's important. Thank you. I yield back.
Instead of fanning the flames of extreme rhetoric, we should build on the progress we made over the past 2 years under President Biden. Let's reject extreme partisan rhetoric.
I serve on the Intelligence Committee, and as a physician, when the pandemic began, there's no doubt I took an extreme interest into what was going on. Mostly, what I was interested in was what was going on physiologically, causing so many people to die. We began our COVID-19 origins investigation in February of 2020. And we found an article during that time that I had never seen before, medical article, research article, published by Ralph Barrick from North Carolina and Dr. Zhengli Shi from China. An article that showed that they were able to create a chimera, which is gain-of-function research, where you take one virus, parts of it, put it on another virus, and make it more infectious. I'll never forget, I'm not the one who found it first. The other doctor did, and he called me and said, "You won't believe this," and sent it to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is extremely alarming. Fast forward, after a FOIA request was able to reveal some emails from Dr. Fauci, Christian Anderson, and others, going to the end of February of 2020, where Christian Anderson said, "This thing looks engineered." Immediately, Dr. Fauci reacts. He contacts his deputy. Capital letters, be ready, I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember exactly what the email said. But I do know the email had an attachment to it. And it had the attachment of that very article about the creation of a chimera.